Hello, my name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books Podcast, episode number 148 in chronological order. So today, we're going to be looking at a few things. But before we do that, we have to consider some facts. Every good story, just like every life, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the sentimental and romantic parts that happen between those bookends are what makes for a life. In an era such as ours, where we are always on, always connected, and always judging others and finding them wanting, collectively at this point in time in the West, we are drifting back from the desire to know everything about everyone all the time. As a matter of fact, before I came on this podcast today, I just read a whole article from someone on Substack, basically announcing their departure from Substack, saying that it's too commercialized and no one goes here anymore. What we really want from people is honesty, transparency, and above all else, authenticity. However, we are still in an era of social media curation that's happening at the exact same time. Too many people, poorly inculcated into a deeply visual culture, still believe that the future is the airbrush photo brought to you by artificial intelligence and large language models. Except, of course, as in any other era, the young, the sentimental, and the romantic are looking to be led out of the space of the fake and into the space of the real. But what does leading out of the seeming abundance of the fake and into the desert of the real actually look like at a practical level for leaders? How do they find their way? And what is the vision of the future after we have sentimentalized the past? Today, we will be summarizing and analyzing some of the themes for leaders embedded in the Romana Clef, sentimentalizing the decline and fall of a lost generation. Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Leaders, it's not the society that is tragically screwed up. The tragically screwed up parts also live in all of us. Now, I kind of called an audible on this intro and kind of wrote it, which is why if you're watching on video, Libby looks confused. But today we will be joined by Libby Unger, back from episode number 145, where we did the geopolitical Victorian romp through Ford Maddox Ford's Parade's End, what I consider to be a bookend book. And later on, we'll be bringing Libby back, and we'll be talking about A Farewell to Arms this year as well. But welcome back, Libby. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. And my little furrowed brow always gives me away.
You're like, what is he talking
I
about?
tried to
That's
do
not
renovate, but it doesn't work.
like that's not on the
My
script.
speaking, I had caught up. But
It's okay. It's all right. It's okay. I called an audible. I rewrote it because well, this is the first episode of our new format. So if you listened to episode number 147, which you should have listened to before this, we introed Tender is the Night, and I talked about extensively about the literary life of F. Scott Fitzgerald and some of his challenges with writing, with alcoholism, with his wife Zelda and her insanity. We even read on that episode the great not really epigraph, that's not really the term I want to use, but the great sort of commentary that F. Scott Fitzgerald, or not F. Scott Fitzgerald, sorry, that Ernest Hemingway had on her in a Movable Feast, a little piece in that book called Hawks Do Not Share, right? Which was the first time that Hemingway realized that Zelda might not be all at home. And that, of course, impacted how Fitzgerald wrote and the kind of space that he wrote from. And Tender is the Night was Fitzgerald's probably least selling book of the ones that he wrote. And he actually tried to rewrite it in the 30s, and it didn't land then either. Matter of fact, this book sold fewer copies even than The Great Gatsby, which is the one, of course, that everyone knows him from. Which did not sell like hotcakes initially. Okay. This Side of Paradise, Beautiful and the Damned, these books sold a lot better, right? And of course, Fitzgerald had his short story output, which was incredible in the 20s and 30s. So we're going to open up with Tender is the Night. We're going to start off in chapter 1. And we're going to sort of lay the foundation for this as Fitzgerald describes the French Riviera scene. And I quote, "On the pleasant shore of the French Riviera, about halfway between Marseille and the Italian border, stands a large, proud, rose-colored hotel. Deferential palms cool its flushed facade, and before it stretches a short, dazzling beach. Lately, it has become a summer resort of notable and fashionable people. A decade ago, it was almost deserted after its English clientele went north in April. Now many bungalows cluster near it. But when this story begins, only the cupolas of a dozen old villas rotted like water lilies among the massed pines between Gauss's Hotel des Étrangers and Cannes, 5 miles away. The hotel and its bright tan prayer rug of a beach were one. In the early morning, the distant images of Cannes, the pink and cream of old fortifications, the purple Alp that bounded Italy, were cast across the water and lay quavering in the ripples and rings sent up by the sea plants through the clear shallows." Now, I'm going to pause here. There's something very interesting that Fitzgerald does because he comes from a different time. He fully and completely describes what you are going to see at Cannes, right? What you're going to see when you go there. By the way, the Cannes Film Festival just took place the weekend before this recording. And apparently Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez were there with their yacht, which was obnoxious from what I understand. One more sign, I guess, of a decadent, gilded era in which we are living. Back to the book. Before 8, a man came down to the beach in a blue bathrobe, and with much preliminary application to his person of the chilly water, and much grunting and loud breathing, floundered a minute in the sea. And when he had gone, beach and bay were quiet for an hour. Merchantmen crawled westward on the horizon. Busboys shouted in the hotel court. The dew dried upon the pines. In another hour, the horns of motors began to blow down the winding road along the low range of the Marais, which separate the littoral from true Provençal France. A mile from the sea is where pines gave way to dusty poplars as an isolated railroad stop, whence, one June morning in 1925, Victoria brought a woman and her daughter down to Gauss's hotel. The mother's face was of a fading prettiness that would soon be patted with broken veins. Her expression was both tranquil and aware in a pleasant way. However, one's eye moved on quickly to her daughter, who had magic in her pink palms and her cheeks lit to a lovely flame, like the thrilling flush of children after their cold baths in the evening. Her fine forehead sloped gently up to where her hair, bordering it like an armorial shield, burst into love locks and waves and curlicues of ash blonde and gold. Her eyes were bright, big, clear, wet, and shining. The color of her cheeks was real, breaking close to the surface from the strong young pump of her heart. Her body hovered delicately on the last edge of childhood. She was almost 18, nearly complete, but the dew was still on her. That's how we open Tender is the Night, with a description of our character that will be moving the plot forward and will act as a fuel in what's about to happen between Nicole and Dick Divers, a couple who are American escapees, I guess is maybe not the word, but they've traveled right to Europe, and they are part of the party set in 1920s and early 1930s France. And that is one of the things you know about Tender is the Night, right? It is a novel that shows how the other half lives. It is a novel that demonstrated in real ways to people reading in America who were right on the cusp of the end of the Roaring '20s and the beginning of the Great Depression, just how much they were missing in life. And so I'm going to open up my questions for with this one. You mentioned last time we were talking about Parade's End, a little bit off mic, how much you really enjoyed this book. What would you say for you was the most captivating element, Libby, of Tender is the Night?
I think just how universal humanity is, that even as we live in in the 2020s, 100 years later, the desire, mental illness is prevalent, and they called it schizophrenia back in the 1920s, and now a dissociative identity is maybe the more common term now. Numbing, not wanting to live in reality and numbing through alcohol is a constant. Backdrop is just what is the only thing changing. It was hard. It was hard to read. When you look behind, it wasn't hard to read. I mean, as I told you, I love reading books from this era, and the way that F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway describe the backdrops and the people just are so real to me. I feel like I can just plop in, and I know the conversations, and I can have you can have them all, and just feel a part of it. From the clothing to the smells to the backdrop. But it's also because it's in in France. And France is pretty timeless, at least from 1900s to 2025. Backdrop is similar. The story of the haves and the have-nots, a constant. I think that the most resonating is how we want to keep mental illness to feel like a secret. If we get and how maybe it's that psychotherapy doesn't work. No one has a solution to therapy. I could have told you that back in 2000, in 2000, but it's kind of a constant that we have to live it through life, as well as the numbing, and this pursuit of more doesn't satisfy the desire to feel real, and nor just sitting back and judging and numbing satisfy the feel, the need to feel real.
Well, and there's this and I think about it often when I read about World War One, right? We're sort of coming off Parade's End, right? And this is all the stuff that happened after World War One, right? So after World War One, people wanted to party, which makes sense. After every war, people want to have a time of a break. They want to party. They want to forget the problems and the challenges that were inherent in sacrifice that was involved in warfare, right? Whether the sacrifice was large or small doesn't seem to matter. Even in our time, right? I mean, one of the interesting things with our 20-year adventurism in Afghanistan and in Iraq is, well, two interesting things. So one, we had the party, but it all happened on social media, where everybody across the world could see it. But then number two, that's our new communication medium of choice. But then number two, George W. Bush, back at the end of 9/11, said possibly the worst possible thing you could possibly say, which was, don't worry about it. The economy is going to be fine. Everybody go shopping. Like, that's not, that's not what you say, right? Which shows a failure of political leadership in our time. Also, it sort of set the tone for the unseriousness that we've had during the last 20 years of what was quite frankly chaos, in my opinion. And we've talked about that on this podcast before. 100 years ago, however, and this is the thing that I always have to think of, I have to kind of sort of contextualize it. You talk about universality, and I agree with you. However, 100 years ago, there were some things that were genuinely new on the horizon. And we can speak about it 100 years later because we're cynical and we've seen the backwash of it. But consumerism was genuinely new then. Consumerism driven by capitalism at an industrial scale was new. You had people who were actually beginning to live the kind of lives that later on at the end of World War II and going into the 1970s would just become things that they expected, right? But they were beginning to have that taste, right, of quote unquote the good life. And it was sort of starting to filter down into the middle class. Then you also had celebrity, the beginning of the celebrity culture, which Tender is the Night kind of personalizes that. And one of the things that really jumps out to me about this book is Rosemary is a Hollywood star, daddy's little girl, right? Which the way Fitzgerald writes about Hollywood, and then, of course, later on the struggles he had writing in Hollywood, are the exact same struggles. It's the exact same parallel and the exact same way that people think about YouTube stars now. The way we think about YouTube now, if we're a Hollywood star, is the way that Hollywood people were thought of by people who believed that theater was the big art form. And if you weren't in theater, you were nobody. What was this Hollywood trash? What is this? Like, you just stand around and like the camera, it's garbage. Just same thing that like the Hollywood people say about YouTube now. Like, it's amazing to me. Like, Hollywood writers will not work in YouTube. They just won't do it. They refuse. And they struggle with the fact that YouTube is eating their edges, and actually eating the whole industry, the same way that theater people struggled with movies eating their edges, right? And later on, movie people would struggle with TV in the 50s, right? At a much smaller scale, but movie people kind of saw it coming and sort of were able to integrate into that. So that sort of struck me. So celebrity culture was beginning, consumerism was beginning, and then you talk about therapy. We can only, I mean, that's kind of say we can make 100 years after, because Freud was new. Like, Freud's like Victorian, and Jung was running around. These were new. I mean, Dick Divers is a psychiatrist. All these things were new at the time. New ways of dealing with folks. Even his interactions with his rich psychiatry patients. There's one that's in early in book 3 when his partner begins to believe that Dick's not serious after he comes off of the fist fight with the Italian cops, which was probably not wise, but probably not wisdom there, Dick. But he comes off of that, he goes back to Switzerland, and then he like starts his long, slow, decline into ignominy. And it's at that point that you begin to see how his clients engage with him around psychiatry. And Fitzgerald sort of shadows this early in the book or throughout the book, where Dick can't even write a second volume of his like medical book that was going to make him famous. He can't get it up off the deck. And partially that's the challenge of a writer's struggle, which is Fitzgerald, which shadows Fitzgerald's challenges in real life with the partying and the drinking and Zelda and everything else. But it also, I think, and maybe Fitzgerald wasn't intentional about this, but it's his critique of psychiatry. Like, there's something that's not there, but it's too new for us to figure out what the something is that's missing. And so you see all these things that are new. And so I have to look back on this book when I was reading it. I say all that to say this. When I was reading this book, I had to give people forgiveness and grace rather than judge them through a 2025 lens. Because if I judge them through a 2025 lens, I will judge them harshly and I will find them wanting.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't have that challenge. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is I'm probably going to double down on individuals' responses are universal.
Yeah. Okay.
So right now, commercial consumerism enabled by financial engineering and, all those things has probably penetrated a little deeper into society. But and the narcissism associated with me, because there's a bit more wealth and decadence. People are looking for ways to feel valued and validated externally. But I think those are all, regardless of what the trigger is, I hate that word.
I know, but it's the right word. It's the right word.
It's the right word for that context.
Right. Yep.
Regardless of what the trigger is, the struggle remains the same, which is how to find, how to survive in the world. The base, getting past your base needs from a Maslow pyramid of needs. Once those base needs are met, we start to get into more decadent psychological responses to what's happening in the world. And that's where when people start getting what they're told is supposed to make them feel whole, like more wealth, relationships, education. They continue to look externally for answers to feel whole that only internal work can solve for. So, well, commercialization is real, consumerism is really high right now. We have the ability to be even more narcissistic, at scale than before. We have lots of people who have shifted from alcohol to marijuana and all different types of drugs, but they're still numbing because they can't fill the hole within them. Today, I don't know what we have to move to microaggressions in order to find, a PTSD that we need to hide from. Versus back in 1920, it was legitimately World War I World War I and trench warfare. But if you see the common thread is, I was wounded, I'm a victim, life isn't as I expected it to be. I'm gonna look, externally for, validation and or numbing in order to reconcile what I expected life to be with what it is. And we will get, the common theme that I've been talking about since my aha, maybe like 18 to 24 months ago, is where right now, we're such a secular society, the 7 deadly sins are everything that's being promoted at mass, and that's the downfall of a civilization. When you have a more God-fearing or religious society where you have faith in something greater than yourself, you're kind of released from needing to you're released from those other from the self-destructive sins, greed, pride, wrath, gluttony, faith in something greater than yourself is what will put you into a place of being satisfied with life, or not demanding more from it than it is, accepting life as it is. You do mention the shirt sleeves to shirt leaves in 3 generations. I've mentioned that several times. It's because that first generation is just trying to get at the base Maslow's pyramid of needs, and they're willing to work hard to make sure that they have food and a structure over their heads. Everything else after that, they're told is going to fulfill them, and they're still left empty. Their children still probably feel a little hungry, and they're trying to find meaning in life through more wealth and education, and etc. They find that it doesn't fill them. And the third generation is like, we know that money and all these other things you're telling us doesn't fulfill us, and they like slide back down into poverty. So these are all to say that the universal human experience is the universal human experience, regardless of the trigger.
And you know what? When you frame it that way, I don't disagree. One of the brutal truths that the West was able to integrate versus the East, but able to integrate from an Eastern religion. And people forget this. Christianity is fundamentally an Eastern religion at its root, right? But the truth that it was able to integrate into the West was, to your point about, for lack of a better term, sin. the material world is never going to fulfill you, and to look for that fulfillment in the material world is sinful in and of itself. And Buddhism kind of goes halfway with this, with all life is suffering, but then what do you do after that? And Islam goes in the direction, again, another Eastern religion, and says, well, yeah, life is suffering, let's just crush everything. And I know that my Islamic listeners are going to get on me from being reductive, but I got to be reductive for this point. So let's crush everything and let's move on, right? Let's conquer it all for Allah. Judaism kind of gets halfway there, but then locates everything in a temple, in a physical manifestation of God on the earth. And this is why when Jesus shows up and says, I am the temple and I'll tear it down in 3 days and restore it, they all lose their minds in the New Testament, right? And I'm not talking about the average, on the ground Jewish person. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the people who were in charge, and the temple really worked for them, right? Jesus gets to a core truth, which the core truth is buried in Christianity, which is that the material world will not satisfy you. Looking for that satisfaction is sinful in and of itself in the material world. And the only thing that will satisfy you is the grace and the blood and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Okay. And fast forward 2,000 years, and I like your point here. I'm going to restate it in a different kind of way. We just find new tools to sin with. And so, 20 years from now, we'll be doing the same things with AI, right? We'll have come up with, we're already down the road. We're already down the road to AI pornography. We're already down the road to that. We're already down the road to virtual reality, sexual pleasure, which is, of course, tied into dopaminergic reaction. We're already down the road on that. And who knows what sort of deviance will develop out of that, but it will develop, because all the technology does is give us new ways to sort of try to fill, to your point, our base, the yawning appetites that lie at the base of who we are. And going past that does require something that is a belief system that is existential and exists beyond merely all of that. Yeah. Right. So I don't disagree with any of that. I was merely saying, I gave them grace because the culture that Fitzgerald came in, the cultural context he came in, the bucket, right, was a bucket of coming out of the death of the Victorian era. Like, the Victorian era died in World War I. Right. So just like in our era, where the 60s is dying, has been dying for the last 20 years.
Not fast enough.
I know. Every Gen Xer believes that. It's fine. I understand. The millennials will finally kill it. They will. They are finally going to put it in its grave. It's going to be done. I'm already watching it happen in real time. But the problem here is, just like when we read books on this podcast about revolution, what do you replace that thing with, right? And Fitzgerald didn't have an answer for this. He just saw, he was just doing cultural reportage, kind of like Joan Didion would do much later on, or James Baldwin in a different context. He was literally just writing what he was seeing. He was seeing that this person was trying to fill it with alcohol, to your point. This person was trying to fill it with sex. By the way, there is a lot of sex in Tender is the Night, a shocking amount. I was very surprised. And it's not explicit. I will say that it is not explicit. And if you're a mature individual who kind of knows how things work, you will see it everywhere. However, a high school student can read this book, and it's not, there's no naked expose of this, right? It's just like the first time that Rosemary and Dick finally, do the thing. It's one sentence. And it's not even a descriptive sentence. It's a contextual sentence. And again, if you know how things work between men and women, if you've had any life on you whatsoever, you'll read that entire paragraph and you'll go. And I did. I paused because, again, I come from a more explicit time. I read that paragraph and I paused and I went, oh, okay. That's what happened there.
Right.
Yeah. It wasn't prurient. It wasn't prurient. That's what it was. It's not prurient. That's I can appreciate Fitzgerald for that. But what he was doing is he was looking at what people were filling that bucket with because they had no good ideas. They didn't know what to do after World War One.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that's kind of touched on in this book, and then we'll move on. I wanted to see if you caught this, but the other theme that was kind of touched on, particularly with the rich folks, is a theme that I see reflected in our own time, which was that sense of self-hatred, I guess, about their own wealth. Because to your point about shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, all of the second generation wealthy folks that were coming to Dick for psychiatric help, either with their child being a homosexual, the results of incest or child abuse, using too much alcoholism, whatever the presenting thing was. And we'll talk about Nicole Warren here in a minute. She was fascinating. Regardless of the presenting thing, these wealthy individuals who made money all invariably had children. At least one of them, Baby Warren, is a notorious character here, who either behaved badly or were wandering towards being socialist revolutionaries. And that was another thing that was new in the 20s and 30s. Like everybody thought, and I have to remind myself of this, it's really hard. Everybody thought communism was the way to go. Everybody thought that. They really did. Because Walter Duranty went to the Soviet Union and lied, and nobody had a way of proving that he was a liar, not at the mass public level. And so they just bought it. They just bought it hook, line, and sinker. They bought the whole thing.
Talking again about like the left and the progressives who believed in it. They're no different than today.
This is what I'm saying. Like, this is the parallel I'm drawing. Yes.
This is the creative class, and or the uber elite that we're talking about with the self-hatred and the communism. And Marx was a child of of wealth. He had a trust fund. So I unfortunately I think I understand, like I probably understand these people far too well because I've walked with these people and they're miserable. So like to me, it wasn't surprising,
Oh no, it wasn't surprising to me either. I found it to be
the self-loathing is really prominent. Like
yeah.
Self-loathing is really prominent. And that's again why you get to the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves is they feel guilty, but they're not producing, they're not creating, they're living a life of luxury, they're telling others how to live, yada yada yada. I think of King Charles, like right off the bat, right? Like, he's clearly a miserable man who hates humanity, and everything's been given to him on a silver platter, literally. I went to a private high school the last 2 years of high school after having been in public school through 10th grade. And like these kids came from immense wealth and had everything handed to them, and they were miserable. Like they were super smart, like they could, SATs, perfect scores, everything, came really easy to them, but they had a gray cloud around them all the time, like literally a gray cloud around them, like all the time. And I saw it same at elite college. You know, those of us who tend to be a little more optimistic, I refer to myself as a pragmatic optimist. I find I'm not like the smartest tool in the shed. The thing that differentiates me is I'm willing to work my ass off, and I love to learn, and I'm not satisfied with not understanding something.
Yeah. Well,
And there comes there's a lot that comes from overcoming challenges and doing it on a regular basis. Like you feel good and grateful for what you got because it's really hard to get.
well, I will say this. Maybe I'm in the first generation to get some in my family because I don't feel a modicum of guilt. Not one of modicum of guilt or self-loathing at all.
No, it doesn't happen in that first class because in the first
Right.
intervention because you know how hard you work. Like no one, like when Obama said you didn't do this on your own, it's like yeah, the fuck I did.
Yeah. Exactly. That's right.
No one
That's
else was
right.
getting up at 5 a.m. and staying up until 12 a.m. And sure, one of my favorite sayings is opportunity favors the prepared mind. So
Right.
people create, conditions within which you can thrive. But I'm sorry, if there's a wall, I'm going to find a way under it, over it, open a door. So yes, the conditions need to be there. I'm not in a prison, so you don't
Right.
put me in a prison, but I don't know. Like, yeah, you did it on your own.
Well, it's I think of Snoop Dogg's Hollywood Walk of Fame speech where he's like, I want to thank me. I always tell my wife, like, if anybody ever gives me an award, like a famous award, like something that's really high profile, I'm going to just basically steal his entire I want to thank me speech. And I'm just going to do that. And my wife's like, you got to stop. Like, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. But it is true. Like, I want to thank me for getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I want to thank me for not quitting. I want to thank me for like doing all the things and going the extra mile when other people quit and weren't willing to do that thing.
We're willing to take some risks that others weren't willing to do. While people are on the sidelines, you're in the arena while others
Absolutely.
are on the sidelines telling you can't do it. And yeah,
Exactly.
I make some decisions that were not that great, but did I learn from them? Yeah.
And fundamentally, I'd like to thank God for putting me in the position where He did, because you know what, I could have been born in Russia, or I could have been born in South Africa, or I could have been born in Brazil, or I could have been born in Canada. I wasn't. I was born here, and you know what? I didn't. I
Exactly.
was that wasn't the thing I picked. I was put here, and I took advantage of what was given to me and the wealth that was given to me in being put here. That's what I did, right? That's the free will part of the equation that again comes out of a Christian understanding of sort of how the earth is structured, and how reality itself is structured. We do have free will, and we do have the ability to choose. And so we shouldn't have self-loathing. Like, we shouldn't have that. We shouldn't have that guilt. Now, we should have guilt, I would assert, if how we got our money was illegal, immoral, or fattening. Then we should have guilt.
Like for me, yes, I agree. It's like like exploiting others, using others.
Yeah.
No guilt about have guilt for that. For me, part of what I wanted to elaborate on the sense of faith is about also
Mm-hmm.
having a sense of service to others, wanting to help others
Mm-hmm.
thrive. Like I honestly believe other people's success is my is my success because I want them to be successful. Like so
Mm-hmm.
I help those who are willing to help themselves, right?
Right.
That is, and that gives me great satisfaction to see others thrive, but they have to do the work.
Right.
um,
Right.
and
Right.
getting the
Yeah.
material benefits from that, great. I'm not going to shake off of material benefits, but I'm not going to define myself by material benefits. That isn't my sole pursuit. It's a nice outcome of being a greater service to others beyond myself.
Well, there's an interesting philosophical idea, which if you don't buy into Christianity, that's fine. It's still an idea that is about the cornerstone of reality. So you better buy into that, which is, the Lord gives you the ability to gain wealth. Now, because of the pushback I always hear from people who are a little more, shall we say, progressive than myself, the thing they will always say is, well, there's all these poor people who are working their butts off and they're not getting anywhere. To wit, I point out, yes. And are they working their butts off at the right thing? Because if they're working their butts off at the right thing and they're appropriately aligned, they will get somewhere. Will they get as far as Dick Divers in Tender is the Night? Will they get as far as Nicole Warren? No, they may not get there. Will they get as far as Jeff Bezos and his obnoxious yacht with his teak that he probably sourced from some like woods somewhere in like Thailand that's illegal? No, they probably won't. And because two things can be true at once, that's okay. If you're an inch ahead of where you started, and we used to sort of have this concept in our country. If you're an inch ahead of where you started, say thank you and be on your way. And that sense of, and this is the flip side of the self-loathing if you're wealthy. The flip side of that is the hatred of the wealthy, the envy, which is the particular sin of the poor, is or those who don't have as much. Which if you have $1 less than somebody else, you're poor. Okay, the envy, and envy is about objects. Jealousy is about people and relationships. Envy is about objects and stuff. That's why we have to separate those two. But you will be envious of what people have. And you particularly see this in everybody's critique of Elon Musk. I mean, oh my gosh, the leftist critiques of Elon Musk are all based on, they're all based on envy. We can better decide what it is he needs to do with what he's earned than he can. That's all envy. That's all envy.
Yeah. And I want to go back to where you started with, like, are you working at the right stuff too?
Right.
Like making the right decisions about, like, how you saving your money, where you spend your money. And you always hear about, like, the millionaire next door who lives extremely modestly, and they worked really, really hard and they just put it in the bank or they invested it. Like, it's a whole set of decisions that people are making. It's not just about how hard you're working. Like, I always, whenever I went into a job, I knew what I was contributing, but I also knew what I was getting out of it, and but the next three options were that I was pursuing. It wasn't an end state, right?
Right.
So, like, where am I growing? Where is this taking me? I always had to think about it from that perspective, but I also knew it wouldn't take me anywhere if I didn't think about what they needed from me, right?
Correct. Right. How do you put yourself in? I don't know. As I've gotten older, one of the things that's become more, maybe not animating for me, maybe that's too hard a word. It doesn't really animate me. It's just one of these intellectual things that I sort of chew over when I'm like outside on my property picking up dog poop or whatever,
Yep.
Whatever. What else are you going to think about when you're doing that, right? But when I have time to intellectually masticate over this stuff, one of the things that's interesting to me is I don't know, and no human being does, by the way, how everything links together to produce an outcome. I have zero idea. So in working on the right stuff, I get it. If you're poor in not understanding the correct questions to ask because the people who came before you couldn't even frame where you should look correctly, yes, you're going to be upside down, and your life's going to be hard, and you're probably not going to get as far as somebody who framed the question correctly and framed what the answer might be correctly for you. Like, this is one of the things I try to do with my children, and I try to surround myself with people who try to do this with their kids. So the question is not, like for my 8-year-old, like, can you sell eggs on the street for like $1 or whatever, right? The question is, do you have everything aligned correctly in order to be able to sell eggs for $1? And if you don't have everything aligned correctly to sell eggs for $1, you can go ahead and slap up something out there, but you're not going to be successful. And so these are the kinds of things that like if that framing isn't there for you, I get it. And we live in the most open, free, and informed culture on the face of the planet right now, historically speaking. We have the massive sampling tool known as Google, where you can just go ask it a bunch of questions. You could figure things out. You have zero excuses. So we're all out of excuses, kids. We're all out of excuses. We're all out of envy. We're all out of jealousy. We're all out of that. And yet, because our technology allows us to send more and just in better ways, we still continue to pursue this, right? We still continue to have the excuses. So,
Well,
yeah,
and people will stop will stop and become blocked because there's no certain path.
right.
And that's why I stick to what are my three options out, is
Yeah,
because an exponential number of options out means I won't have clarity and I won't be able to see something as it
correct.
presents itself. And one option is is locked on perfection and thinking you understand all the opportunities. Like, you don't know what's around another corner, you don't know what's behind another door. And too many people need certainty. And that's why they'll sit on the sidelines judging, because they were too afraid to just like take kind of some leaps of faith about where something will take them. And as you get older, you realize how little you knew or could ever predict about what those opportunities were. You just have to have, I don't even want to say faith, just know that, you learn more with each opportunity that's new and you pursue, and your path will change because you learn more.
Yeah.
You be reckless and, expect the world, but also don't stop because you need certainty. It's this balance around optionality and just having a vision towards growth. And even more importantly, recognizing that from a job, I always pursue I want to be economically viable in the marketplace, right? Because economic viability gives me options so that I'm not locked into a specific career that may be dead-ended or a company that is dead-ended. Economic viability, it means I have optionality. I want to make sure I'm valued in the marketplace, so I develop skills that are valued in the marketplace. And I am always looking at a job as like it's a partnership. I am there, like they are paying me for results. They're not putting my butt in a seat. They're not paying, or some companies are, but those aren't companies I want to work for. They're not paying for me to look busy. They're paying me to deliver results that matter. And so I look at, am I delivering results that matter? And it may be different if you have internal customers versus external customers. And what skills am I gaining, that I can take to that next opportunity? Unfortunately, too many people think a job is a guarantee and a right. And too many people think that there's just one prescribed path and that learning stops after college.
Right. Yeah. Or even worse, or sometimes even worse, high school, which is a whole other bailiwick. Yeah. All right, let's get back to the book, back to Tender is the Night. I want to talk a little bit deeper about, we kind of touched on therapy, and sort of the model that's used in Tender is the Night, but I want to pick up deep into the book. So we kind of introduced Rosemary there. I'm going to kind of go into book 2, and in book 2 of Tender is the Night, Fitzgerald retcons. Well, not retcons. He goes back into the history of Dick Divers and Nicole Warren, and we begin to learn that Nicole was a psychiatric patient. That Dick was in essence brought in to manage. And as he begins to deal with her, as he begins to treat her for her mental illness, her schizophrenia, he falls in love with her, right? And this, of course, works really well for the Warren family, who are wealthy and willing to throw money around. Nicole's older sister, Baby Warren, is a mini tyrant in her own right. You'll see that later on in book 3, after, as I already mentioned, Dick gets into a fight with some Italian gendarmes, which is not really the term, but it's okay, it works. And is thrown in jail, and Baby Warren is the only one that can get him out. There's something there about a screaming socialite that I want to say, but I don't. I think I want to just leave it there. I just want to let it sit. Just gonna let that sit. But during the course of Dr. Diver's relationship with Nicole, they move to Switzerland, and he opens up a hospital there, begins to treat the patients who are wealthy, of other families who are expatriates, or who are coming from America to Europe, who want a private doctor who will keep their stuff out of the newspaper headlines. And this creates problems between him and Nicole, now no longer Nicole Warren, but now Nicole Diver. And the problems come to a head in chapter 15 in book 2 of Tender is the Night. So I want to pick up here. I want to read some sections in here. That way you can see just how fragile things become with Nicole. Meals with the patients were a chore he approached with apathy. The gathering, which of course did not include residents at the Glentine or the beaches, was conventional enough at first sight, but it brooded always a heavy melancholy. But over it brooded always a heavy melancholy. Such doctors were present, kept up a conversation, but most of the patients, as if exhausted by their morning's endeavor or depressed by the company, spoke little and ate looking into their plates. Luncheon over, Dick returned to his villa. Nicole was in the salon wearing a strange expression. "Read that," she said. He opened the letter. It was from a woman recently discharged, though with skepticism on the part of the faculty. It accused him, in no uncertain terms, of having seduced her daughter, who had been at her mother's side during the crucial stage of the illness. It presumed that Mrs. Diver would be glad to have this information and learn what her husband was, quote unquote, really like. Dick read the letter again. Couched in a clear and concise English, he yet recognized it as the letter of a maniac. Upon a single occasion, he had let the girl, a flirtatious little brunette, ride into Zurich with him upon her request, and in the evening had brought her back to the clinic. In an idle, almost indulgent way, he kissed her. Later, she tried to carry the affair further, but he was not interested, and subsequently, probably consequently, the girl had come to dislike him and taken her mother away. This letter is deranged, he said. I had no relations of any kind with that girl. I didn't even like her. Yes, I've tried thinking that, said Nicole. Surely you don't believe it. I've been sitting here. He sank his voice into a reproachful note and sat beside her. This is absurd. This is a mental patient. I was a mental patient. He stood up and spoke more authoritatively. Suppose you don't have any nonsense, Nicole. Go and round up the children and we'll start. In the car with Dick driving, they followed the little promontories of the lake, catching the burn of the light and water in the windshield, tunneling through cascades of evergreen. It was Dick's car, a Renault, so dwarfish that they all stuck out of it except the children, between whom Mademoiselle towered mast-like in the rear seat. By the way, Mademoiselle is the governess. They knew every kilometer of the road, where they would smell the pine needles and the black stove smoke. A high sun with a face traced on it beat fierce on the straw hats of the children. Nicole was silent. Dick was uneasy at her straight, hard gaze. Often he felt lonely with her, and frequently she tired him with the short floods of personal revelations that she reserved exclusively for him. I'm like this, I'm more like that. But this afternoon he would have been glad had she rattled on in staccato for a while and given him glimpses of her thoughts. The situation was always most threatening when she backed up into herself and closed the doors behind her. Then I'm going to skip through and go into a couple of different areas. So they get out of the car. They go through a Punch and Judy show through Con. And then they get back into the car. By the way, he also loses her at this Punch and Judy show in the circus. So he's running around trying to find her. He leaves his kids with like two random French women, which is just sort of amazing to me. I would never do that, but okay, whatever. I guess this is how the other half lives. That's fine. And they eventually get back in the car after getting the children, who were quote unquote with a gypsy woman in a booth. And they start driving again. And I'm going to pick up here. They started back with hot sorrow steaming down upon them. The car was weighted with their mutual apprehensions and anguish, and the children's mouths are grave with disappointment. Grief presented itself in its terrible, dark, unfamiliar color. Somewhere around Zug, Nicole, with a convulsive effort, reiterated a remark she had made before about a misty yellow house set back from the road that looked like a painting not yet dry, but it was just an attempt to catch at a rope that was playing out too swiftly. Dick tried to rest. The struggle would come presently at home, and he might have to sit a long time, restating the universe for her. A schizophrene is well named as a split personality. Nicole was alternately a person whom nothing needed to be explained and one to whom nothing could be explained. It was necessary to treat her with active affirmative insistence, keeping the road to reality always open, making the road to escape harder going. But the brilliance, the versatility of madness is akin to the resourcefulness of water seeping through, over, and around a dike. It requires the unified front of many people working against it. He felt it necessary that this time Nicole cure herself. He wanted to wait until she remembered the other times and revolted from them. In a tired way, he planned that they would again resume the regime relaxed a year before. He had turned up a hill, then made a short cut to the clinic, and now as he stepped onto the accelerator for a short straightaway run parallel to the hillside, the car swerved violently left, swerved right, tipped on two wheels, and as Dick, with Nicole's voice screaming in his ear, crushed down the mad hand clutching the steering wheel, righted itself, swerved once more, and shot off the road. It tore through low underbrush, tipped again, and settled slowly at an angle of 90 degrees against a tree. The children were screaming, and Nicole was screaming and cursing and trying to tear at Dick's face. Thinking first of the list of the car and unable to estimate it, Dick bent away Nicole's arm, climbed over the top side, and lifted out the children. Then he saw the car was in a stable position. Before doing anything else, he stood there shaking and panting. "You," he cried. She was laughing hilariously, unashamed, unafraid, unconcerned. No one coming onto the scene would have imagined that she would have caused it. She laughed after some mild escape of childhood. "You were scared, weren't you?" she accused him. "You wanted to live." She spoke with such a force that in his shocked state, Dick wondered if he had been frightened for himself. But the strained faces of the children, looking from parent to parent, made him want to grind her grinning mask into jelly. Let's talk about mental illness. The question I have here is probably not the greatest one about creative talent and times such as ours. So I'm going to ask a different kind of question, Libby. I'm going to call it audible on this one. I'm going to ask a different kind of question here. I don't have a whole lot of experience with mental illness, particularly schizophrenia, at a practical level. I've known people who have been anxious. I've known people who have been depressed. I have people in my family who suffer from anxiety and depression. So I've seen up close what that looks like. I myself have been a depressed person and have bootstrapped myself out of that, primarily because I'm obstinate and prideful. Those are my own two sins. I'm also ridiculously stubborn, and I refuse to ask for help for something that I think I can solve for myself. So those are my particular problems and foibles. But I've never dealt with someone with that sort of split, right? Personality. And I don't know if you have in your experience. So I guess the question here is, or no, not the question, the framing around the question is this. So the Victorians, where Freud came out of, sought to leverage psychiatry as a way to substitute for social shaming, and as a way to shortcut social norming, right? Because if we could just get people to be normal, right, and go along, then everything would be fine, right? And yet there's these people showing up with these splits, and they do this thing and they do that thing, and we don't understand why. And Jordan Peterson, along with many others, but I'll just use him as a public example. Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about how, and I think this is very interesting, particularly when we're talking about transgender individuals, there's a social negotiation that goes on between all of us as individuals and the larger society, right? We shouldn't be trying to get the larger society to bend to our individual whims. Instead, we should be trying to bend to the whims of society, because maybe the wisdom of crowds is actually a thing, and maybe people who have come before us may actually know something. Okay. Mental illness is the primary feature in Tender is the Night. Past all of the stuff with like ingenues that you get with Rosemary, or the alcoholism and the self-medication which you get with Dick and everybody else. But Nicole and her family, the Warrens, specifically are impacted by mental illness. And Nicole even breaks up her marriage because she feels she is cured of her mental illness, even though there's some argument to be made that the guy that she goes off with might be a little bit touched in the head himself, as my grandma might say back in the day. Well, back in the day, they were rough back in the day, right? And I'm wandering towards the question here. So I guess the question is, I had all that framing. So let me phrase the actual question, right? And give you a chance to speak here. What do we do with mental illness? Like, what do we do with that? Is that something that no, maybe that's too broad a question. Let me frame it this way. When mental illness shows up, right? How can we navigate that with people that we love? I do think that Dick did love his wife. I genuinely do. But I also think
All right, do you have me? Oh, okay. Was that me or you? Sorry. Okay.
you're good.
All right.
So yeah, so how do we deal with each other when we're mentally ill? I don't know. That right. Like this, this is one of the huge things for Tenterizonite that I couldn't get my arms around it.
I can't either. Largely because it's a spectrum, right?
Right.
So you have the full on, you know, one extreme where people need to be institutionalized because they cannot help themselves and they are of physical harm to others. You know,
Right.
we see a lot of those on the streets of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a full other spectrum where people just want attention and they act out for like attention.
Mm-hmm.
See that a lot right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, and I think if you feed it too much, it evolves into greater psychoses that
Mm-hmm.
force people into a reality that is completely detached from reality, and they do become even more ill.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a one size fits all. I personally haven't dealt with anyone who has schizophrenia, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if my definition of schizophrenia is based off of, Sally Field's movies, in the 1970s, and if that's real or not.
Ordinary people.
Yeah. But I only know from, for me, similar to you, I dealt with my own depression. And I don't know if it was actually depression, but I did medicate with alcohol and kind of that accelerated path into like shame and depression. That is very common for addicts of any type. And the only thing, and I had, my bottom was feeling, is when I am super stubborn as
Mm-hmm.
well. I don't ask for help. I don't, I'm not someone who wants, who will tell people when things are going on.
Mm-hmm.
Positive, because I don't want attention for either.
Right.
I'm not, I just want to deliver and do great things and go on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the shame when it was no longer acceptable to be the party girl and you're still like, drinking and doing all that stuff was enough to start to get me on a path to wanting to fix myself. But shaming is very effective. And I think there's a balance. I will also say I was a heavy kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And heavy by 1970s standards, not by 2025 standards.
Okay, sure.
Right. And I didn't like that it took me a long time to find clothes that fit. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so what did I do about it? I learned about like you burn calories. It's the mathematics of what you take in and what you burn. And I found great ways. I found I liked tennis, and that tennis would make me, not only did it help me to lose weight, but I felt really great afterwards. I found things that opportunistically, I didn't like find like one path that worked, but I was like, oh my gosh, like tennis actually feels really great. Hitting the tennis ball against the garage door, or playing tetherball with myself. Like those were ways that I just got myself out of feeling bad and victim and into trying to do something about it. Those are words that I use today. Those are words, not words that I had when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old.
Right.
I just knew what felt good. And for me, fortunately, it was things that were, had actually led to a healthy life and to being successful, because I was willing to work really hard. And it felt a lot better to work hard than to sit and complain that life wasn't going my way. But that's how I'm wired.
Right. Right. And this is okay. So this is one of the challenges of reading a book like this,
Right.
or watching a movie like, I mean, I did make the joke, Ordinary People, or any other joke about mental illness. I mean, I think of the movie in the 1990s with Billy Bob Thornton, who's the autistic guy, Sling Blade. Um, um, it's one of those things. Again, I don't understand how reality is put together, right? I just don't. I'm trying to figure it out, right? And I don't understand at how mental illness operates at multiple levels, right? And I don't think anybody does, by the way. I think even the most highly educated people don't understand how it works, right? Even the most highly educated in this space, they could just tell you what the best guesses are because it's individualized. And there's certain aspects of treatment that only work for certain kinds of people and don't work for others. So one of our guest hosts, co-hosts, Dave Baumrucker, works in the clinical psychological space. And a good friend of mine, we were rugby teammates years ago and went to college together, and he's gone off and done other things. I've gone off and done other things, and it's been amazing. But in that space of clinical psychology, and it's not just when I hear him describe it, it's other clinical psychologists who I've heard describe it. It seems a lot like whack-a-mole. And not to lean too much into the religious pieces of it, but I do think there's a spiritual element to this, which again, we do not understand. We just don't get. I do think it's there, because why would it be everywhere else but not there? Okay, that makes no sense. And you even kind of touched on it a little bit, where you said at an emotional level, where you decided, I don't like this thing, and so I'm going to go over here and leverage this skill that I know I have here to get this outcome here, to go into the back door to get this outcome here, to stop this thing here from happening. That's a multifaceted solution that's unique to you. I wouldn't have gone and picked up tennis. I just would have doubled down on the drinking, probably, because I'm just that guy, right? Or I would have, because I'm hard-headed, I would have just run into a wall eventually at a certain point.
It wasn't like an overnight. It wasn't an overnight.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. And I'm not. I want to be very clear. I'm not being reductive in your experience. I want to be very clear about that, right? And it did take time. But when we're dealing with like Nicole driving, the car over, off the road, at that point in the book where I was there, I stopped reading. I just stopped reading for a little while and walk away from it, because I thought, I don't know how he didn't kill her. I don't know how he didn't strangle that woman in the car. I don't know how that didn't happen, because this isn't like, cars with airbags in 2025. Like, this isn't that and rollover and all that. Like, a car in 2025, it's a bad thing, don't get me wrong, but it'll survive a rollover, an accident, whatever, airbags, safety features. This was a car in the 1920s. It's probably closer to like a Model A or a Model T, one of those crappy Renaults. Like, there was no safety anything. Like, there was no seat belts.
So, but I what you're getting at is a whole nother a whole nother question. So one, what's the solution to mental illness? And two, what's your response to someone else's mental illness?
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
The latter is detaching yourself from, like, one of the greatest skills that I've developed over the last like 20 years is detaching yourself from how others perceive you, or detaching from how others treat you, because their experience, I actually do, I think I'm just a target based off what someone else's life experience has been. It has very little to do with my intention. It has very little to do with how I've delivered or what I've done. They're acting based off of their life experience. Today I can create boundaries so that person is no longer, so I'm no longer in physical danger or emotion, or don't have to deal with the emotional up and downs that individual can create, or the drama that they can create. I can have compassion for their situation. But I no longer take it personally. Right. And if Nicole, I would have been livid, but me being mad about it won't change it. Right. And that's very different than where I would have been 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I would have been irate and yelling, but that's not going to change the situation. So the next step is, what do I do now? Right.
I would have been irate at Nicole as well if it had just been me in the car.
Yeah, it was the kids. Yeah.
But now it's my kids. And I've invested a lot in these people.
That's what your next set of actions are, right? Now you
Yeah.
take the children away. You need to put her into a place where she's safe, because she now is not safe for society and or the family.
Right. And now I have to have a hard conversation with, I have to have a hard conversation with my children. Mommy's gotta go for a while. Mommy can't stay. So that's going to be one hard conversation. The other hard conversation is going to be with Nicole's family, which we'll get to that in a second here. But I can't have this person around my children. I don't care how much money you have, that set it on fire, like the Joker of the Dark Knight, whatever. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. You don't have enough. Okay. And then that's going to be one hard conversation. That's going to be a second hard conversation. The third hard conversation is going to, quite frankly, be with Nicole, because, when she's not in her right mind, it's not going to matter. But when she is in her right mind and is going to want to know what's going on, you can't have sort of a, Rapunzel kind of posture. Like, you can't just lock her in a tower and hope everything's going to work out. You have to sort of get some info. And again, this is all about me not understanding how all this clicks together. And so looking at those three hard conversations, I love it how you talked about boundaries in order to avoid taking it personally, but also being equipped to have those conversations. And weirdly enough, because Dick Divers was so clinical, the way Fitzgerald wrote him, because I don't think Fitzgerald actually did research into clinicians. I think he just based it off of what he saw.
Yeah.
And put a chunk of his own personality in there. He didn't have the ability to put the boundary in. And so Dick didn't have the ability to put the boundary in, much less have the hard conversation. He just sort of, and this was Dick's sin, he just sort of took the Warrens' money and, for lack of a better term, ran. And I hate that. I hate framing it like that, but it's true.
And it happens way too frequently. It's the expert class, right?
Right.
It's about putting faith into the expert class, even when it's not, the psychology of the time was the experts, but it's not working.
Right.
So.
Well, and you can see it in the way the book ends. Like, I won't ruin it for folks, but when you go read it, like the last page of book 3, which is the end of the book, it's just sort of on the one hand, from a writer perspective, from a creative perspective, I think Fitzgerald struggled with how to end this. He didn't really know where the ending should be. Like, how do you because this could just go on and on. This is just like whatever.
all I'm thinking about is addicts, actually, and I think that's really good. I mean, it is a mental, I don't like calling it an illness, but it's a mental condition.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things when friends come to me and they're dealing with addicts in their family, it is really hard. It's like, I would actually, it's going to be a long journey. And there's no guarantee of success. So
Mm-hmm.
to think about what's going to be like, I know you love this person who is in your family and an addict. But when it gets to at one place, all addicts do is lie. And all they're not thinking about you at all. And you may want to believe that they're thinking about you. They're playing games and telling you that they're thinking about you, but they are not. All they're doing is thinking about their next fix and how to get it and to make sure that you continue to be there to facilitate, enable their addiction. So there is no easy answer in all of this. But that's kind of late stage. And one of my, sadly, I'm a very rational person. And, one reason like relationships are not like at the top of my list outside of professional relationships is because I'm like, talk about it once, talk about it twice, but third time I'm out. Because I'm about taking action and not just sitting in fear or masturbating to an idea. Like, let's talk about it once, talk about it twice, and we're out. And so I don't have a lot of tolerance. I'm not going to be an enabler. Let's just put it.
Sure.
But in an early in a relationship with someone who may not be well, like you're not in a position to make those types of judgments because you don't know.
Right.
So addiction is just easy to talk about.
Yeah.
It could just be someone just drinks 5 nights a week, a light drink, and you may make a comment, but then it starts to accelerate and you make another comment, but you got to start putting in boundaries where that individual is capable of making decisions in your best interest, but they're not. And so that's where you have to have boundaries. The challenge with like schizophrenia and others is, are they ever in a position to make the best decision for themselves? And at what point do you let them out to fend for themselves so that your life is not negatively impacted? And that's the gray area that I do struggle with because I don't want people living on the street. I don't want people, I want people cared for. So when do you actually bring in institutions to help an individual?
Right. Well, and a point that has been made to me by various people over the last, I would say, 10 years in different contexts, in different conversations, has been that we shifted around the laws around institutionalizing folks in the 80s, and Ronald Reagan, or Reagan's administration, shifted around a lot of the institutionalization models in the 80s. And that was doubled down on in the 90s. And now, to fully come back around to what you were talking about with homeless people, right, on the street, the vast majority of homeless folks, if you take out the addicts, right, although there's a lot of overlap in these two areas, but do suffer from mental illness. And it's hard to know and I'll call it mental illness, it's fine, but it's hard to know where the intersection and the overlap is because the self-medication follows from the other things, right? And so we're in a state culturally of where we looked at what went on in the institutions, and this is that cultural weakness that we're apparently going through, or a lack of cultural confidence is what I say. So we have a lack of cultural confidence in a lot of different areas. One of the big areas is immigration. Like, we don't even want to hear the word assimilation. We don't want to hear. We don't want to hear that things are going to pause and then we're going to make these people be Americans, whoever they are, for wherever, right? I don't care if they're from South Africa and the Ukraine, or if they're from coming across the border. We don't like that word assimilation because we don't have the cultural confidence to believe that America is the best because guess what? People chose with their feet to come here. Okay, fine. We don't believe it. Cool. But then that cultural confidence, that lack of cultural confidence drips into other areas. And so of course we have a decline of trust in the institutions. It's a circle, right? So the population loses trust, the institution becomes less effective. The institution then changes its laws in order to regain trust. That doesn't work because now you've lowered the bar. And now we just have this slow downward slide between institutions and the culture with a lack of trust and a lack of confidence until you finally wind up in, San Francisco, in, whatever that park is in San Francisco, where people are doing, it's an open air drug farm. And and you can't tell the difference between people who are schizophrenic and people who are just, on fentanyl laced heroin. Like, you just can't tell the difference, right?
I mean, the difference doesn't
matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Correct. And so
bringing back the institutions is important. But one of the things that we have done is we almost glorify like mental unwell.
Right? Well, and that's a sign of hedonism, but that's a sign of hedonism and decadence and too much wealth.
Right. Where everyone's a victim, the victim Olympics, oppression Olympics, but the whole Jordan Peterson quote I think is really important, is we don't want a society, a society that moves to the whims of every individual. And we also don't want a society that doesn't allow room for individuals to be individualistic. And right now, people are trying to force their whims on all of us. Yeah, that's why the language is constantly changing so that we can never come to a common definition or solution to anything. But we have to, everything is about trying to find balance in the whole ecosystem and continually to measure like the effectiveness of things that are working. Newsom, he said no one's never done more for homelessness than him. And let's define what he's done for it. Like, is he defining what he's done for it by the amount of money he spent? Or are you defining it by the outcomes of the money and how it's been spent? I would look at the outcomes and say the outcomes, you've done a lot more than anyone else, but the outcomes are negative. You got to reevaluate what you're doing and how and why. But one of my concerns with where we are now in a society is everything's an external answer. Everything is like a pill or food or some sort of external effect, and that if you bring in institutions, that they're just going to institutionalize all of the poisons that are actually could potentially be exacerbating kind of the mental illness that is out there. So how do you? I always worry about institutions going too far, because we in the regulated world that we live in right now, that's institutions just wanting to grow and continue to take on power. If we are create institutions for mental illness, like, I want to make sure that there are boundaries, and very strict and small boundaries of what is institutionalized mental illness and how we take care of those folks. The rest of it, to me, is about working downstream and with families and education and a lot of the other things that have been ignored that are prerequisites for accelerated mental illness and self-medication.
And that's where we get to with In Tender Is the Night, Nicole Warren. Not Nicole Diver, Nicole Warren. Nicole Warren's father abused her and created an environment where he was actually the one responsible for her mental, no, I won't say he was. Yes, actually, no, I would say responsible. Absolutely, for sure. I would say his actions. No, because you could be responsible, right? But not be right, but not accountable, right? You can also be responsible. Are you?
You may
Right.
be responsible, but I'm the only one who's accountable.
Correct. That's right. That's right. Um, you can also be responsible and not at fault. But this was a situation where he was responsible. He avoided accountability because of his wealth. And he was the one who was at fault, I think, for the split inside of her brain.
Yeah.
And he was also responsible and at fault for the damage he did to his older daughter in creating an environment where she felt she had to protect her younger sister, leveraging his money. There's a whole scene, a whole incident that happens where we're at the end of book 2, I think, where Warren is dying or whatever, and Dick comes and sees him, and he's like, he's in the hospital, and he's talking about the regret or whatever, and he's got to get Nicole to come see him, and da 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 da. And Dr. Diver, for lack of a better term, sort of fails that test a little bit, and is going to, and gets a letter and then delivers it to Nicole, and she's trying to make the decision if she's going to go see him. And then, of course, because it's a weird, not weird, it's an inappropriate relationship already because of the abuse. She, of course, runs to see him, and he has gotten up out of his bed and escaped or gone back to America. And then he just walks out of the story. He never is referred to ever again. And it weirdly enough a lot of this book reminded me of the movie Magnolia in the 1990s, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. And the old guy played by Jason Robards, who is Tom Cruise's father, right? Who's dying in the bed the whole movie, muttering about regret. And it put that thing in my brain, because I'm a cinema guy as well. So put that thing in my head, and I'm hearing the Amy Mann song underneath it, and having the whole experience, right, while I'm reading this. And that character in Magnolia didn't get forgiveness. Well, no, the son had to forgive him because the son had been abused by the father. And that, of course, turned him into this person who wanted to seduce and destroy all women. Okay. And he blamed his mother for leaving, and da 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 da. Okay. The same dynamic happened in Tender Is the Night. You just flip the genders, right? And you can see this most notably in how Nicole ends her marriage to Dick, through intentionally, pursuing an extramarital affair, and then sort of in a very post-Victorian, pre-World War II kind of way, allowing two men to fight over her. And Dick just doesn't. He's like, I'm not, number one, you're a boxer, so that seems to be a bad idea. And this is back in the day when every man could handle himself. And he could handle himself. Like, he wasn't going to be, I mean, it's going to be a problem. But like, how much do I want to get messed up over this woman who's trying to manipulate me into some shenanigans or nonsense that I don't need to be manipulated into, right? And so the whole thing just sort of collapses in on itself. And that leads me to turning the corner here, because we've got to wrap up. And I want to thank Libby for coming on the podcast today. This is one of the, I thought it was going to be easy, but this is one of the more deceptively tough books that we've covered on the show. And we've talked a lot about a lot of things today. We've talked about, the obsequiousness of wealth. We've talked about mental illness. We talked about addiction. We've talked about sort of the nature of where we are at currently 100 years later, and how nothing much has really changed. It's just our technology has gotten better for us sinning. And we've also talked about the nature of family secrets, and how do you deal with mental illness in a family when it endangers people. Okay, a lot of different areas we've covered. I'll ask the penultimate question, which is the question we always ask in this podcast. What can leaders take from Tender Is the Night? If I'm a leader and I'm a hardcore, like, hey, I'm going to get psychological insights from like Adam Grant. And I've mentioned him like 4 times today already, and I don't know why he's living in my head rent free. I have no idea why. But anyway, I'm going to get insights from that person, or from Daniel Pink, right? And that's going to be a better use of my time than reading this book. Why is reading this book better than reading something by Amy Edmondson or Daniel Pink or the aforementioned Mr. Grant or any other leadership book writer you could read? What are you going to get out of this that you can apply to yourself, probably first, and then your team?
Allegory.
Yes. And this is why we're going to take a break from Shakespeare this year. This is why. Yes. No, go ahead. Keep going with that.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love Daniel Pink. Adam Grant, not so much. I think he's overly simplistic and not, I think he thinks he's smarter than he is. But you could have just asked Libby 90% of it that he says.
Just ask Libby. Just ask Libby.
But Daniel Pink gets into more of the NLP type of stuff, even though he doesn't call it that specifically.
Yep.
But none of them get into the reality of the human experience and the challenges of dealing with different types of individuals and personalities, and you need to be adaptive to individuals and their different needs, while at the same time not enabling and creating boundaries, and when necessary, removing them from situations where they're impacting others. One of my favorite and most true statements is that you never fired someone fast enough. You can never fire them fast enough. To me, leaders, there is never a leader who said, I didn't fire them fast enough. Like, they'll always say, I wish I'd done it sooner. You need to take toxicity out of the workplace, and toxicity is about personalities that are creating havoc on the teams.
How do we do that when we are in a space right now in our world where, and I wrote this word down because I see it a lot, where we are almost commanded, like it came down on a tablet from Mount Sinai, like Moses delivered it to us, well, this is the way it's framed, right? We are commanded to affirm. How do we, but this is the point of all the DEI programs, and this is the point of affinity groups, and this is the point of all of it. Like, how do we deal with that dynamic?
Yeah, when you recognize really what it is, it's not good faith. The affirmations are not about good faith. The affirmations are about trying to control others. And they typically, especially in the workplace, I see them mostly employed by people who are afraid of doing the real work and work that is designed to deliver results. So they focus on the small stuff and not the big stuff. I want true diversity in the workforce, but it doesn't need to be talked about all the time. It's just about how you show up. And the way that you address it is like the guys at Coinbase did, is like, that stuff for you. Like, I'm all about you living your truest life. We're a business. We're about delivering results that matter to our customers, and respecting all individuals. And we're focusing on delivering a great customer experience at an economically viable price. And, we want, the way that I'm going to, my promise to you is that as you deliver, I'm going to create opportunities for you to thrive in the workplace based on the results that matter in the workplace. So you just got to be strong. They're basically spoiled children trying to dictate to their parents how their parents should react.
Well, and it's another example, and I've been working on this idea through our shorts episodes. It's yet another example of many of a thesis I'm working through, which is we ask the workplace to take on too much. We put too much weight on the workplace. And so do I want people who are genuinely going through a mental health crisis to be supported? Well, to be supported by their workplace, in their workplace, telling them to go off and get help because you can't get help here? Absolutely. That's the correct move. Go off and get help because you can't get help here. We're not qualified to do that. Heck, even if it's even the people running a mental hospital should probably go take them. If you're messed up, go do it, right. Don't ask the mental hospital where you're working to be the place where you get right. Okay, so that's the extreme example, right? I absolutely am in favor of that. I am not in favor of to your point, the whole self movement that has sort of taken hold of our culture, where the leader in the environment, whether that person goes the title of manager or supervisor, is asked to affirm the whole person. That's too much weight to put on that leader. And quite frankly, it's too much weight to put on that workplace, because to my point earlier about families and your point earlier about families, family is where that weight should go. And yet, because we have moved over the last 20 years more and more towards this atomization of family, we're going to have to struggle to get back to that. I'm writing a whole thesis on this. I might publish it on my Substack that no one goes to anymore, and see if anybody will read it. But I've got some ideas. I've got some thoughts on this, because I think we're putting too much weight on the workplace.
We put way too much weight on schools and and now we're doing it on the workplace. And we need to, communities are there to support you for your extracurriculars and the things outside of the workplace. The workplace, we want you to feel welcomed. We want you to feel like the conditions are there for you to thrive, but there are going to be boundaries for that. And, and there need to be,
well, otherwise we can't get the work done. And then
I think, part of this is a product of there being too much money being thrown at companies right now, and there's no accountability about results in the workplace right now, because there's just so much money chasing a lot of business ideas. Accountability, like, we're not in a hard time right now, so people can waste precious time and resources on things that don't create value for the workplace, in place of the things that do create value for the workplace.
Well, I'm
not insensitive to people's needs, but those are not things you bring into the workplace. Like, there's a time and place for all of that, and it's
and we should have a species, I think, of hard-headed empathy. So our empathy should not be our empathy should not be weaponized against us to achieve a particular outcome as a form of manipulation.
Right? And that's what it is. It's about, that's what politics is all about: weaponizing empathy as they gain power, and then changing the rules, again, to create more places of power. But it's all about weaponizing empathy, to gain power and control. Look at David Hogg, like.
And with that,
over to the right now, because he realizes that
I will not say, because it's another 3 hours. I will not say anything about that beyond this. I was surprised that he was the person that the DNC selected. I will just say I was shocked, because it doesn't, on the surface, it doesn't check any of the boxes that we have been told the Democratic Party checks for the last at least 15 years. We've been told. So I don't know what shenanigans are going on underneath that. And we don't have time to explore those right now. Maybe we'll do that on the next episode of the podcast with Libby.
Real parent in the workplace again, and not the children running not the children running the institutions.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to stop. So I want to thank Libby Unger for coming on the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today, talking about Tender is the Night with us by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I would encourage you to go out, pick up a copy of that book. And with that, well, we're out.